Albert Stromquist, principal at Lanstrom Advisors, sitting in China. The world is it back to normal? China growing again in January, India at 6-7%, IMF increasing forecasts. The world is all as well, and so the sort of optimistic market outlook we saw through the month of January, we end the month and it all seems justified. What's the perspective from China, Albert?
Well, I mean, let's look at the reality. First of all, we're still in the midst of the Spring Festival. So people are just kind of crawling home now, back to work, back to school early next week. The purchasing managers index clearly has jumped back up over 50, which is a good sign. But just remember, that's a leading indicator. So I mean, we'll look for improvements in manufacturing sales and exports later in the first quarter, as that index begins to yield results. Travel is back domestically, not to pre-COVID levels, but there was a respectable degree of both domestic and foreign travel, mainly by Chinese airlines to Asian regions and some further abroad to Europe and the US. Now, where is it going from here? The economic problems are really deeper than that. They are the result of 3 years of quarantine and COVID controls that left cities and towns near bankruptcy across China. Who the cities, municipalities were paying all the costs, bearing all the costs of healthcare and testing and quarantine during this 3-year period. And remember that the cities and towns are financed by their own captive special purpose investment companies, to which they have deeded the property in the town, and who in turn have borrowed vast amounts of money to pay the town for the property. When the property market is surging ahead, that model works fine. Otherwise, it begins to look like a pyramid scheme, and the cities and towns are left holding obligations for the debt that their special purpose vehicles have incurred. So this is a very serious issue that's not going to be resolved quickly. They have to work through it very carefully. There have been some policies offered to the property market to try to reduce the pain, but those haven't really had a time to take any effect yet. So we can only watch and wait and see where those policies take effect.
The FT has sort of framed this as the China reset, and of course, there's many parts to that in order for it to add up to being a sort of return to what was from the point of view of consumption and growth, or some sort of the idea in the reset, of course, is some sort of re-engagement with the international community, not only through travel and trade, but also geopolitically. Your thoughts on where that reset is for the macro picture, because we still have an economy that is 30%. I mean, it's a kind of a mind-boggling number. 28%, I think, to be precise, of the GDP is dependent on the real estate construction industry. I don't know how they reset that. How do they reset that into a positive narrative rather than a seriously draining one that saw 30% of real estate value drop last year?
Well, thank you, John. Look, to your first question, the opening up is creeping forward. The Chinese are traveling again, but the country is still closed to international travel. So as far as tourism, international tourism, that hasn't happened yet, maybe later on this year. So they're taking a very cautious approach here to how they re-engage. There is a political re-engagement taking place, but the full scope of re-engagement has yet to be seen. The property market, to come to that question, is in crisis. And the steps that the government has proposed, I think something on the order of 500 billion yuan so far committed to mitigate the stress on a group of property developers, not the whole industry, but a select group of what they consider to be the better companies, it has yet to be implemented. Right? So we're not seeing what that effect is. And I think, as we've discussed before on this program, the property market is heavily overdeveloped in China. Right? So that doesn't bode well for a surge in property values, especially on the mainland where that overdevelopment is very prominent. Now, the third leg of that historically here has been infrastructure development. Right? And there is some indication from the government that they will begin to look at new infrastructure opportunities. But given the depth of penetration of new infrastructure in China now, it's hard to see where that's going to occur in any kind of meaningful way. And then when you look at it as a driver of GDP, you say, is that really fair? Because the money's coming from one government pocket into sovereign-owned construction companies, who are then paying taxes back to the government. So it's really just cycling cash and then building assets in the process. But it's kind of sketchy as to how that works as an economic development engine.
Albert, looking forward, I'd welcome your thoughts on that, and also maybe just pick up on one or two comments that Narendra made about this China reset. It's not back to what it was. This is a new dawn in which supply chains are looking to move elsewhere.
No, I agree. It's a new beginning. I don't think anyone expects to see China bounce back onto the trajectories that they saw pre-pandemic. Look, and we've talked about oil. I think Bloomberg put out a paper a couple of days ago. 11 economists have agreed that China will demand an additional 800,000 barrels a day in 2023. And I have to ask
the IEA
myself,
forecast.
Yeah, look at it as a contrarian and say, for what? For what? For transportation, and for what? Captive power generation, for manufacturing. And that's where most of the crude oil goes here in China. For exports, yes, they'll probably continue to use arbitrage where it helps them to earn foreign earnings. But beyond that, if you look at the ratios between China's economic growth and crude oil demand over the past 20 years, crude oil has played a diminishing role in driving economic growth, GDP growth here in China. That doesn't mean that crude oil imports have been diminishing. No, they've been growing as well, but they've been getting a much bigger impact out of all of their other combined energy sources. And that's continuing to change. And there's an argument to be made that China could comfortably cap out at 15 to 16 million barrels a day and continue to grow and never need any more oil beyond that. So there's so many
even to get back to that would be quite an achievement in the current economic cycle, particularly when you consider their two biggest customers for anything made in China, the US and Europe, are certainly in economic stress.
That's right. So sorry, I missed my point.
I was going to just to take up the point. Does the rate cycle mean anything for the Chinese economy?
Not necessarily, although they're going to continue to keep their own rates low here in China, because to do otherwise would be counterintuitive. It would just exacerbate their already difficult economic problems.